And I'll probably... Well, I have to mention Skripchenko and Pogonina. They went for the same line of Giuoco piano, so-called Giuoco piano Italian, which is defined by, well, bishop c4, bishop c5, and later on white plays d3. All that we call Giuoco piano. So it can be c3, knight f6, d3. It can be d3 at once, a pawn instead of a castle, or castle, as we have in this game and also in a previous game of Skripchenko with the white pieces. Knight f6, d3, c3, and, well, I will not get tired of repeating the same. I fail to understand, which move to play for which side and in which order. Because if you open the database, you check, and you have 5 moves for white played by strong grandmasters, and then 5 responses for black, and all of those typical moves like a4, b4, knight bd2. And yeah, it's hard to say. a6 is a well-known plan, by the way. So potentially bishop will go to a7, not to run under the tempo of the d3, d4. So a4 is played, and then h6, played by Natalija Pogonina, because after bishop a7, or, well, it was in her game against Alexandra Kostyniuk, bishop a7, knight went to a3, she castled without playing h6, and then had troubles after bishop g5, which might be not a bad position per se, this position with black, but Pogonina decided she wants to avoid it, so h6 was played, preventing bishop g5, knight a3, which is a modern way to play this position instead of usual knight b d2. Later on, rook would go to e1, knight to f1. Knight a3 is a modern take, played already by, I think, this plan with knight on a3. And as I said, I'm confusing if it was this position or something else, but the development of knight on a3 was played by all the big names. I've seen Vishy Anand doing this. I remember Fabiano Caruana doing this against Topalov in the candidates. Castles, rook e1, bishop went to a7, knight c2, bishop e6. In a previous game against Sarasadat Khademalshariya, Skripchenko had rook e1 played, bishop e3, and then after bishop e6, she took over there, she went knight e3, rook a8, b4, d5, and queen c2. And strangely enough, this symmetrical position happens to be, symmetrical structure is most likely to arise on the board after d4, d4. This symmetrical position is somewhat better for white, which is really not easy to understand why, because it seems black has more space, black is more active in the center, but it happens to be that this knight on c6 is not very good piece, because, yeah, it is restricted on c3, knight e7, knight g6 will be met by g3, so this is the ideal knight on e3 in this position, which was confirmed, by the way, in the yesterday's, or was it today's, I'm not sure, with the time zones, a game between Magnus Carlsen and Sergei Karyakin. Magnus had this knight on e3, the game he won to level the score. All right, so this time black plays an immediate bishop e6. So white captures on e6 and f e6. Once again, I have to confess, I've never came to understand what is bad for black after this capture. So usually white will try to go for d4 and claim he's somewhat better, but a semi-open file here, pawn on e6, controls some important squares. So it's hard to say why black has to be unhappy about this position. This is a well-known plan, queen e8, going to h5 later on with some kingside intentions. So it must be objectively fine for black. So don't see a trouble just yet. Move number 11, that is. And yeah, okay, fair enough. Giuoco piano, so piano. Very slow approach. Right, but in Kostyniuk's game, so that game looks more and more like a game between Karyakin and Carlsen. And, you know, it might be sort of a direct transposition here. Something like if knight will go to f4, g3, knight will go to h3. It looks very, very similar. But if I keep serious, then after g3, I think white does get somewhat more pleasant position, because still those double pawns will require attention. Sooner or later, white potentially can grab some space with a4, a5. Could be that I want to start with a4, a5 though, because knight f4 here doesn't do much. g3 and you will have to go back. Basically, there's... Yeah, right, so perhaps to start with a5 to make sure white gets some space over there. Later on to play g3 to restrict this knight from g6. Yeah, white is better. Don't know how much, but white is better. Something like knight h5 heading over there. This might be an idea. So that after g3, black will play queen f7, king to g2. And here it's the question if a jump of one of the knights to f4 works. Because white is ready to play rook b2, defend on f2 and be absolutely fine. But there is knight f4. Check. And, well, not easy. King h1, for instance, knight h3. Attacking f2, attacking the knight. So white is forced to go back and then it's a draw. King g1 again allows a check over here. So you have to play king f1 and still I don't see the way to defend the knight. Alright, so it might be a draw if this line happens on the board. So knight h5, hoping, yeah. It was my a5 move, yeah, right. So, and then knight h5, hoping for g3, queen f7, and draw in this line with a sacrifice on f4. Then I might reconsider my options and then say that first you need to play g3, just to restrict this knights completely. All right, to be seen later on, but feels somewhat more pleasant for white. And Almira, of course, is looking for her first win in this tournament. Meanwhile, well, in some games we are headed towards simplifications. Well, a5 was played, by the way. a4, a5 was played. So once again, knight f4 doesn't seem to bring anything because g3. Knight h5. It's a serious question if white has to play g3 at once. Yeah, there is a funny line. I mean, because on many occasions this knight h5 move is connected with the danger of a jump of a knight, right, and then a discovered attack on this knight on h5. But here knight e5, for instance, fails to knight e5 and queen defends on h5. So this one you can't do. And after g3, as we found out, queen f7 works. Yeah, right. So after knight h5, is there a move for white? Thinking to wait for knight f4 and then to play g3, if this would work. I say rook b2, which is... Well, the problem is that this move doesn't do a lot. Even though you don't have queen f7, it seems, because then it's knight g5, h5, queen h5, and, you know, structure is not particularly good for black. Too many of them big pawns. Knight f4, well, white swaps the queens, goes rook d1, and then is planning to drive away this horsey from f4. Rook here, hoping for knight h3, knight f2, and white can fall for this actually, because check, king g2, you take, and after rook d2, f2 knight gets trapped, it seems. Even though, yeah, there is something to miss a move like rook f3. So my initial idea was not to go for this, but just to play knight g4 positionally and later on play g3. So knight from g4 will protect the pawn on f2. Right, that would be a disaster for black, actually. All right, so this makes a lot of sense, this rook b2, all of a sudden, because there is no queen f7, and after knight f4, white is still... It's still possible to play g3 for white. And then here, knight is hanging, and probably white has nothing... black has nothing better than queen f7, after which... Okay, that's the easiest line. Takes, 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 king g2, rook here, h4, and here we are. It looks like somewhat improved version of Khanty Mansiysk of yesterday. I mean, improved for white because white managed to get some space with a4, a5 already. All right, so switching over to something else. Javahashev's more was played, knight f4, and this move I sort of disliked because of g3, and I thought black has no follow-up, which proved to be true because Pogonina simply played knight g6, which is a very strange decision. Just to invest 2 tempi to provoke the move, white in fact wouldn't mind to play herself. Yeah, well, has to be said, it's still far from easy for white to make a progress here. While you are not getting b4, b5 under favorable circumstances, no time in the nearest future, let's say. Perhaps really white would love to trade queens. Once again, I'm referring to the game of Khanty Mansiysk with queens being off the board. Then white puts king on g2 and feels comfortable, while here king g2 you always have to look for some tactic, or for knight f4, you know, with queen leaves for some knight g4 jumps. So you always will have to be a little bit careful, even though rook b2, potentially even knight g1 with the idea to play, or h4, yeah, maybe rook. Look, rook b2, black, say, shuffles something, rook d8, and then white can play h4, later on knight h2 and knight g4, swap a pair of knights. Rook b2 was played, by the way. As I said, looks somewhat pleasant for white. This might be a very long game, if white is keen to keep the pressure, because, well, I can hardly see any idea to neutralize white's minimal advantage just now for black. So d5, as we've seen in yesterday's game, does not solve all the problems, even though here e4 might be hanging a bit, so you might have issues protecting this one. After knight d2 there is d4, and most likely you will have to take, even though the resulting position is probably still better for white, because, well, black's majority on the queen side is neutralized, while white can try to prepare f2, f4. I mean, white will play f4 straight off if black doesn't play e5. And after e5 there is queen b3, so you'll have to go king h7 and b5 here, for instance. Not being afraid of the ghosts. Knight g1 and rook e2, if needed, should hold white's king's position safe. Right, rook b2, black really needs to come up with something. And fair enough, 18 moves made, both players on something like 45 minutes to reach the time control. But this is the type of position when, well, while it all looks like every single move is not that important, it's not, you know, sharpest knife with exchange of punches on every move, but every single decision you make in this position indeed is time consuming. There's little details like to play or not to play a5 for black, to provoke g3 or to go knight h5 to try to stop g3. I mean, all those subtle moves are pretty much time consuming. Right. Yeah, basically has to be mentioned that black's problem mainly is this knight on g6, which is not doing much really. Doesn't do at all at the moment. Alright, Pogonina made the move against Giuoco and Miroshnichenko. And after rook b2 d5, this does look like Karyakin's game against Carson. So Carson Karyakin. Well, what was Magnus's reaction to this? Knight d2? Nah, knight d2 was played under another circumstances, but yeah, I think you have to go knight d2. Can I... Which is a little bit weird move, but can I try to take... I was hoping to make use of this opposition of a queen and a rook, but probably I won't manage this. No, that's silly. So after d5, and then e4 is hanging. I don't know how much of a threat that one is, to take on e4 twice. Knight I see a comfortable move for white in this position, so probably I assume that white will have to play knight d2. So this is better for white, right? I mean, or even knight takes. That might be possible as well. So then you can compare the knight on g6 to active knight on e3. So I would claim with the normal pawn structure for black, with pawn being on f7, not e6, it would be still much better for white. But as it is with double pawns, which are weaknesses, it's just overwhelming advantage, overwhelming advantage of something like 0.30, perhaps, according to bot. So that's, but still, I mean, that's a dream position for the player in Giuoco piano. I think that's what you're really looking for with white. So d5, knight d2, I don't think black will take. But since the knight leaves, I think even something like knight e7, my point was to try to get the queen here, but it doesn't help really. Knight f4 looks too crazy, huh? White is a full piece up, right? Takes. Then there must be something for white, even though it's not... No, it is comfortable. Knight g2, I mean, a little bit ugly placement for this knight, but knight g2, then e5 later on. No, come on, it's not serious. So, after d5, knight d2... Black is not forced, yeah, one might argue that black is not forced to go for this d4. Black can play rook d8, for instance, followed by queen f7. Probably that's the way to go for black, not to define the structure at such an early stage, given the fact that white cannot herself. I mean, she can take on d5, but this is obviously a huge improvement for black. So white will have to shuffle around, white will have to play perhaps queen e2, because you don't want to move the queen too far from the king side. And then black, say, plays rook d7, sometimes planning for rook f7. Have to mention one tactical motive. I mean, I don't think king g2 is a good move anyway, but here it's even more silly because of knight h5, and you can't take because of this, and you will have to basically move the king. Well, knight f4 might be an idea again. All right, so it's well, all the 6 games are in progress. Good half of them is interesting, potentially exciting, while in the others there are some chances for a draw. game I still keep referring to as being very close to what happened yesterday between Magnus Carlsen and Sergei Karyakin. d5, knight d2, and it does look like yesterday's game. Rook went to d8 and white played knight g4. Intending to swap this active knight from f6. I mean, if black cooperates, if black takes over there, then plays queen f7, white probably will just go queen e2. Then, king g2, h4 later on, and achieve the position very similar to what Magnus got. There is another possible route for this knight from d2. Knight can go to b3 and c5 later on, particularly with black's queen side being somewhat paralyzed by this pawn on a5, so white is better. Queen f7 at once was played. Now it's a serious question what happens, and it will probably happen, if white captures f6. Because probably you just take with the pawn, because this you are getting a somewhat more favorable version of the previous line, but still it does not dramatically change the evaluation. Queen e2. Well, black has queen g5, but then, I mean, even a move like thought king h1, but then black starts to double on f-file. I didn't know. Queen e3 allows for knight f4 though. Yeah, well, queen f6 might be existent, but still, I think gf6 is the way to go. gf6, planning for f5. Here, black is seemingly doing fine. At least knight on g6, for some reason, I don't feel like it's that bad anymore. Even though knight f6 was taken. Knight f6 was taken and queen takes f6. And well, that's somewhat surprising, because I really thought it was, at least it was worth to consider taking with the pawn. I don't see an immediate drawback. I mean, here it's nothing. King h7. Then you start relocating the knight to e7 possibly. Right, and then in this case at least your e5 is well protected after pawn takes. So queen takes, targeting f2. White is in a real need of a good move here to defend f2. Well, I wonder if this is an option. Somewhat leaving the king side, trying to claim the nothing will happen on the queen side. Takes, rook takes, I assume. Knight f4 is there. A funny tactic that if white captures, then it's this check, followed by queen e4, using the pin. Well, but the problem is that it's not checkers, it's chess, so you are not forced to capture on f4. And it might be something with knight going to c5, even though in this case b6 creates a total mess on the board and probably in the black's favor. So takes, you can't recapture. Well, you can take this one, so that after this check you have rook here, takes d3, and then it has to be a draw perhaps. I mean, black is better if any side. So this is not dangerous. I think then queen e2 has to be played. Yeah, white is just tiny bit not in time, because if white would be able to throw in queen g4, so now it fails because of queen f2 obviously, but if white is in time to play this and then play knight b3, then he's very happy. So knight is restricted, no threat whatsoever, rook on b2 comes in handy, protecting f2. Right, but there is no time for queen g4. There is no time for queen g4. White has to play queen e2, and then after queen g5 there might be some some ideas for black. Knight f4. Right, Skripchenko is somewhat behind on a clock. 17 minutes for her, and still 19 moves to make to reach the time control. Well, meanwhile, Pogonina came up with the move. So let's find out current situation over here. Doesn't look like Magnus's game anymore. Right, an exchange on f6 followed by queen e2, c7, c6 was played, and white went this direction I was mentioning, knight b3, knight c5, knight b3, queen e7, knight c5, d4. And here, well, I'm a bit surprised, to be honest, because I mean, white played c4, which deprives white from a lot of options, while d takes c3 was not an actual threat. I would actually think of taking on d4. I assume black takes with the rook, strangely enough, keeping those pawns weaknesses, but on the other hand getting a square on d4. Yeah, it could have been still nothing special, but after c4 it will be hard to get b4, b5 in, while black seem to have reasonably serious chances to disturb white king. Rook f1, rook f8, and I guess f2, f3 has to be played in the, well, nearest future, which is just now. You won't be able to do it one move later. After, well, I mean, let's say white skips it in some way, and then black will play rook f3. So this is not a move at all because of knight h4, right? Now, king g2 I thought for a bit, but then again queen f7 might be leading to the same actually. White will have to play f3. So then white has to start with f3 after queen f7. No, queen g4. Queen g4, right, serves the same goal actually. Queen g4 attacking this, so there will be no rook f3. Oh, there is. Oh, that's... No, for time being, the knight on g6 is hanging, so there is no rook f3. King h7, let's say. But will be really hard. I mean, now if f3 is a possibility, then probably white is doing great. Then other rook will be brought to f2, then potentially h4 followed by h5, driving the knight away, and finally breaking through with f3, f4. So I take my words back. It's quite good for white, and Skripchenko played it nicely. King h7. There might be a little problem with this though, because knight f4. And, well, who knows what's that. White might be worse. Yeah, I mean, queen is almost getting trapped, if not getting trapped for real. What to do after king h7 then, because rook f3 is a sort of a threat, and knight f4 potentially is a sort of threat. Couldn't I play... No, knight f4 at once I thought for a bit, but then I don't have rook g6. That's weird. So king h7 or queen f7 for this matter. Planning for knight f4. Not easy at all for black. Not easy at all for white. Right. Somehow today it's not your typical round with a lot of sacrifices, a lot of tension. So all the games are kept quite level. That's quite interesting. Batsiashvili came up with the move. Oh, but okay, we've just been there, so I think I better check something else. Kostyniuk is still thinking after rook e7. Well, actually, So far, not a lot of predictions I can make. Skripchenko is better against Pogonina, that's I'm sure. Giuoco objectively has what I would call a winning position against Gunina. Now looking at it one more time, it's really a tremendous advantage for black. And it was Gunina to make this happen, so I'm puzzled. Harika, well, it looked to me that white is somewhat better in the game of Harika and Gira, but now I'm not sure. There are some weaknesses around white king, and white still did not get any material advantage. So, might be just fine for black. Very tense position in Kostyniuk and June's game, where it's really hard to tell if Kostyniuk is better, but I'm pretty sure she's the one who plays for a win. Javahashvili is to be in a mood to play a very long game. Now it's move number 30, and I mean really a lot of pieces on the board. Well, it's hard to see black escaping the pressure in the nearest future. On the other hand, hard to see white making progress in the nearest future. Knight g6 perhaps will have to be played because e5 was hanging, so knight g6, and then white probably can play the plan I've mentioned. f3 followed by rook, by bringing rook to f2, and then opt for f3, f4 later on. f3, rook f2. Okay, let me show. f3, and then black is sort of paralyzed, in fact. I mean, you can shuffle the queen here and there, but can't really make progress. Then white puts the rook on f2. Let's say black passes, then queen goes to g4. Black passes, then it's h5, h4, followed by h5, followed by f4. And then, or let me put it this way, f4 in the right moment. So first I'll play h5, and then I'll see if it has to be f4 or something else. All right, white is really better here. Queen c7 is another try. Ah, well, could be that queen c7 is not such a bad move. After f3, don't know if f3 is needed, but I mean, my point was to try to improve the horsey. So horsey will go to d7. But in this case, you know what? In this case, and even if white takes, it's somewhat. No, but this is not serious, right? Takes, then c5 might be an issue, so I would close everything here, but then how do I win on one flank? No, it's not realistic. So knight d7, what white has to do is to go here. Well, I suppose black cannot really try to open the queen side, because if he can, he should do this. Alternatively, if black keeps standing, let's say black keeps waiting, then this is a very strong, seems to be a very strong positional idea. c5, rook goes here, and knight comes to c4 with the potential to jump to d6 later on and pressing the e5 pawn, so black will be totally paralyzed, and in this case even one flank, one side might be enough for white to open up. Alright, well, meanwhile Gunina and Giuoco reached this.